السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان لكم رقيبا. يا الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد إن أصدق حديث كتاب الله عز وجل وأحسن هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Read the most truthful of speakers the book of Allah Ta'ala, and the finest guidance that of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the most evil of affairs are the newly invented ones, bid'ah. And every bid'ah is going astray, and every innovation in Islam leads to the hellfire. Wasallallahu al-afiyah wa thabat. The topic of today's khutbah, bi'idhnillah, by the permission of Allah, will be revolving around the importance of understanding Islamic stance as regards to free speech and human rights. Wallahi tawfiq. This past week, some brothers and I were speaking about the recent events taking place here in our city, in our country, with the protests, and looking at the situation of the Muslims, how they're being oppressed in places like France. Before, they were saying that they wanted to ban the niqab, and then gradually they said no, the hijab, and now the abaya is being banned in schools because that is a secular society. They've made it clear that they are secularists and they don't want to have religious symbols in the public eye. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's might and power is sought. And we understand that there are certain pockets in the world where they have a strong resentment for religious values or old values, and they want to be secularists. So we have to understand, as Muslims living in the West, that there are pockets in this place that we're living in that are also following the same trend, that they want to implement the ideology of secularism and modernizing or modernism. So as people of Iman, we have to understand, because our conversation went as such. So then how is it that we as Muslims are supposed to get our human rights? How is it as Muslims are we supposed to have our voices heard? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, our response was one of Islam. The way that we want to get our human rights and dignities, and the way that we want and expect our voices to be heard, should be in no other way except by means of the Quran and authentic Sunnah and the fahm of the Salaf of this Ummah. We want to follow the Quran and the authentic Sunnah and the way of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the fahm, the understanding of the Salaf of this Ummah. We understand that in this part of the world, in the West, that we have been allotted certain rights and freedoms of speech and protest, or as they say, peaceful assembly and protest, so long as it does not block the infrastructure, so long as it does not allow for businesses not to run and take place. So alhamdulillah, I mean, what we have been witnessing on the part of the westernized Muslims that are going out into the streets to make their voices heard, so as to protest and wave banners and flags. We have seen the multitudes of the Muslimin and Muslimat, of men and women, Muslim men and Muslim women. We see sisters wearing hijab out in these groups. We see brothers with beards out in these groups, in multitudes of people, screaming and shouting slogans, demanding their human rights be recognized. So we have to understand, as Muslims who are striving to follow the book and the Sunnah, that this methodology of striving to get our rights fulfilled, although it's permissible in this part of the world, according to this law, that it is something which is against our Sharia, our Islamic legislation, and it's against our dignity as Muslims. that we go out in the streets freely mixing between the genders, how many other genders you want to call it. It is not permissible for us to freely mix out in the street while shouting slogans, because we know that in other parts of the world, in poorer countries, they don't have the right to do that. They don't have the right. They have not been allotted the right to go out in the streets and protest and scream slogans, or else they would be imprisoned or they would be killed. So we come here now and we have been allotted these rights and these freedoms. We call it hurriya, freedom of expression, freedom of gathering, freedom of thought, freedom of so many freedom, rights and freedom, so-called rights and freedoms. But we have to understand that there's an etiquette, an adab as Muslims. As Allah, He reminds us about the etiquettes of the road in His book. And the Prophet ﷺ, he reminds us of the etiquette of the road in the Sunnah. For example, in Surah Luqman, Allah says regarding gathering on the streets and shouting, Allah said, وَخْذُوا مِنْ صَوْتِكَ إِنَّ أَنْكَرَ أَصْوَاتٍ لَصَوْتُ الْحَمِيرِ. Lower your voices, meaning that we must not be outside on the streets and shouting at the top of our voices. We should not scream outside in the road. In the playground, it is perfectly normal for children to scream. On the basketball court, on the field of football and sports, and frolic and amusement, that is the place for screaming, but not in the road. Allah, He likened that to the sound of the hamir, of the donkey. He said, إِنَّكَ أَنْكَرَ أَصْوَاتٍ لَصَوْتِ الْحَمِيرِ, that the most detestable of sounds is the braying of the donkey. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He likened the screaming of our voices, loud voices in the roadways, to that of the donkey. And Mujahid, one of the good tabi'i, he has stated that this is a distasteful and a distasteful voice. The most distasteful and detestable of sounds in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's estimation is the braying of the donkey. And that means that for us to be raising our voices in the road is something which is displeasing to Allah, at the least. Allah, He told us that this is implying that this is blameworthy for us. It is blameworthy for us to be raising our voices in the street. And if we understand the haya, the modesty that Islam carries, then we would not be freely mixing in the streets. Allah says in Surah Nur, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّونَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُونَ فُرُوجَهُمْ ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. Tell the believers, tell the men of Iman to lower their gaze and protect their private parts. That is pure for them. Verily, Allah is aware of what we do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking to the believing women, the women of Iman. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغُضُّونَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ يَحْفَظُونَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ وَلَا يَبْدِي زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُورِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. Al-ayah. And tell the women of Iman to lower their gaze and to protect their private parts and not to show off their adornments except that which is apparent, and draw their veils all over their jiyub, over their body. What did the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say regarding the woman? Al-maratul awara. The woman is something that should be covered, should not be exposed. Everything about the female is to be covered and not exposed. the voice of the woman should not be heard out loud and screaming. If they're amongst themselves, if they're playing amongst themselves, that is normal. That is normal for them because they're in the mode of competition. That is normal for children to be screaming in the playground, but it's not normal and it's not acceptable for adults to be screaming and shouting and raising fists with angry faces out in the road. We as people of Iman must display humility while out in the road. We need and we want our human rights, and we want and we expect our voices to be heard. But there's an etiquette and there's a mannerism in Islam, according to the Sunnah, according to the Quran and Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah He reminds us in Surah Furqan regarding how we must display ourselves in the road by saying, وَإِبَارِ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ حَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And the slaves, the humble servants of the Most Merciful, when they are out in the road, they walk with dignity on the road. And if an ignorant person addresses them, they say salam, peace, and they go their way. As people of Iman, we never do tit for tat, but we have seen our Muslim brethren, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all, Ameen, with angry faces, screaming in the faces, we see our Muslim sisters, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them, and us, Ameen, out in front of them, in the faces of the opposite gender, screaming. This is not acceptable behavior for the people of Iman. So when we walk out on the road, we must walk and carry ourselves in a dignified manner. There's a hadith which is muttafaqun alayh, an authority of Abbasir al-Qudri, reported that the Prophet ﷺ's character was more modest than a young virgin girl inside the seclusion of her home. Whenever we witnessed or we knew the Prophet ﷺ was angry, we would see the signs on his face. Never will we find from the Prophet ﷺ seerah that he would be out screaming and yelling. When he was on the mimbar, he would scream and yell to deliver a message on the mimbar. When he's given a khutbah, a lecture, so his voice could be heard, the people in the back can hear his voice. Now, alhamdulillah, we have microphones. We have things to amplify our voice, to deliver a message. But that is in a particular manner, and that is a particular time. But we do not walk out in the street with angry faces and block infrastructure. La. Alhamdulillah, what I mean, we have to understand as people of Iman that the amount of freedoms that we've been allotted to in this country has caused a lot, if not the overwhelming majority of us living here, Muslims and non-Muslims included, to have developed a sickness of overindulgence. We're always looking for ways in which we can benefit from this country. But in the time of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and after the time of the Tabi'in, Itba Tabi'in, when they left from Medina Munawwara, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, they went to different countries and they affected the countries that they went to. They did not follow the customs and traditions of the people of that land, or whatever land they went to. They made an effect on the people in those lands. When they went there, they did tijara, they did business, interacted, they bought and they sold. When the people saw the Ashab of Rasul ﷺ, they said, we want to be like you people. Where are you people from? And they told them about Islam. When Yusuf alayhi salam was imprisoned, Ya Sahib al-Sijn, he gave them dawah, al-arbab, he said, is the God, all companions of the jail. Is the God, one God, mutafarrikan, many gods, like the one God, the one true God, Al-Malik Qahar? Is having many gods like having one God? You slaves serving one master, which is better? He gave them dawah. When Yusuf alayhi salam was in Sijin, he didn't become corrupt in Sijin. When Ashab Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam went to different lands, they impacted the people. They didn't change. So now, my dear Brother man, many of us have lost touch with our own self-worth and value by overindulging in the many rights and privileges that this country, that this Western civilization has to offer. As a result, without realizing, we have developed a disease of character in our heart, believing ourselves better than other people that we left from our lands of the Muslims. Now we are westernized and we are now an aristocrat. We think and we feel that we're better than everybody else. We have to understand, my dear man, that many of us, without realizing, we are now doing a thing called Islamic role-playing. We are being a Muslim when it's convenient to practice Islam. We do and implement little in terms of sacrifice. We do and we exhibit little or no sacrifice for our Islam, for our deen. We are practicing Islam in convenience. We are conveniently practicing Islam. This is the Western Muslim mind state that we have seen. And this state is what is causing many of us to have developed an imposter syndrome. We have to understand what I mean when I say that many of us have now developed an imposter syndrome. We are only looking for when and where it's convenient to be a Muslim or to be like George. We're not wanting to be a Muslim in word and deed. When we wake up, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he warned us in Akhir Zaman that we could wake up asbah Musliman, wamsi kafiran. Akhir Zaman, a person can wake up as a Muslim, and by the time he goes to bed at night, he goes to bed as a disbeliever. A person can wake up as a believer and go to bed at night as a disbeliever. He said a person can wake up in the morning as a disbeliever, and by the time he goes to bed at night, he's a believer. The things would change so rapidly, and we're experiencing that. So my dear man, many of us are, without realizing, unwittingly, don't realize that these privileges, these freedoms that we've been allotted to, they all come at a cost. They all come at a cost. And the overwhelming majority of the Muslims in the West, they are happy to pay that price. The overwhelming majority of the westernized Muslims are happy to pay the price. And what is that price? Of selling our deen for a miserable price of this dunya. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help is sought. The majority of us are happily paying the price. And it's sad that we have adopted the customs and traditions of the people of the West, when we are supposed to be showing them a better alternative to just be waking up and running after the dunya. They don't stop for any salah. We are supposed to stop, and we are supposed to be an example for them. You have to understand, as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has stated in the authority of Abu al-Khudri, he reported the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prophesied. He said, لَتَبْعَنَّ سُنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, that we would be following the sunan, Arabic. We'll be following the habitual practices, social mannerisms, and customs of those who came before us. Shibran bi shibran, dhira'an bi dhira'an, step by step, foot by foot, inch by inch. Even if they were to go into a hole of a lizard, we would follow them into that hole. This is what the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. The Sahaba, they asked, do you mean the Yahud and Nasara? Are you referring to the Jews and the Christians? The Prophet said, man, who else? Who else would we be following? And this is what's happening. The Rasul prophesied that this will take place, and it is happening. So we have to make an effort upon ourselves not to follow their sunnah. Not to follow their sunnah. Not to follow their example. Linguistically means an example. As Muslims, we have to opt to follow the sunnah of Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have Muslims yesterday, the day before, and this weekend, commemorating or celebrating, whatever you want to call it, the Milad al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But where's the love? Where's the love in following the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We have to understand that the ulama of the Salaf, although it's allowed in this country to protest and scream for our rights and take whatever freedom we can get, but the ulama of the Salaf, they told us that protesting and screaming out in the street are from the adat, the customs of these people. It's not the customs. It's not from the customs of Islam. It's not from the customs of the Muslims to be out in the street screaming and begging for our rights and freedoms. La. It's not from our customs. We are now so privileged. Muslims, they search, and we search for everything online. Why don't we just make a simple search to find out what the ulama of the Salaf have stated regarding protesting and demonstrations? Is it permissible? La. It's not permissible. It's not permissible for us. Although we have the right to do that, it is not the way of Islam. It's not the manners of Islam. It's from the adat of these people. It is from the customs of these people that we have chose to follow. We have to understand that if we have a legitimate case and a situation that we need to ask, there is a system known and it's called due process in this country and everywhere. There's a system of law known as due process that the person who goes to the legal goes through the legal channels by requesting their rights, and if they're not, and if they are violated, then that is considered as an undue process. So we know as people of Iman that we go about seeking our rights in a dignified manner. We don't scream and beg out in the street. That is shame, that is ebb on the Muslims, the people of Iman. They need to be dignified. The people, the slaves of Ar-Rahman, we walk with dignity on the earth. Wallah alhamd. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of Iman. Ameen. Bismillah, salatu salam, ala Rasulullah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man. In closing, the process of achieving human rights and free speech does not mean that we give up our Islamic values by adopting new ones. We shouldn't be pleased with adopting the values of John, George, or Tom. We need to be Ibad al-Rahman. We need to be pleased with the Islamic values that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Quran, and the Khair al-Khalqillah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has shown to us in the Sunnah. As the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Athqala shay' ala mizan." The weightiest thing on the scales of Ar-Rahman will be husn al-khulaq, will be good character. So, as westernized Muslims, let us leave that title off. Let us be Muslims first. We just so be happening to live here in the West. Today we're living here, tomorrow we're living somewhere else. But the one thing that we should not leave behind is our Islamic values. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to be of those who have Islamic values and care about our Islamic values, and knowing that Ar-Rahman is watching us, the most merciful is watching us. He is guiding us. And if we need anything, if we feel that we're being oppressed by anyone in this country or any land that we go to, we ask them and we find out the ways of due process of seeking our rights and privileges as a human being. If we are being oppressed, if they curse us or they kick us, then we supplicate and we ask Ar-Rahman for our rights, and we're patient. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help our brothers and sisters who are suffering in France, who are being oppressed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on our Muslim brethren who are suffering in Pakistan in that recent bomb attack in the masjid. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on our brothers and sisters who are suffering in all parts of the Muslim world. Ameen. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabiyyin ya alladhina amanu اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنه وفي الآخرة